The Whisper from the Second Floor, a short horror story. A black Jeep Wrangler with 4 occupants pulled up in front of a grand and imposing 3-story mansion, which was nestled deep in the heart of Thetford Forest in Norfolk, England. Who would abandon a gigantic house like this? Kelvin said, offloading some luggage from the trunk of the vehicle. Maybe someone who knew we needed a break from this crazy semester, Shelley replied, rolling out a camping box containing ice and canned drinks. The majestic building was surrounded by lush greenery, towering trees, and a tranquil lake that glistened in the sunlight, an ideal place for a quiet summer vacation for 4 college students from the University of East Anglia had just finished a particularly grueling semester. They were all in dire need of a break and some time away from the hustle and bustle of their studies. That's when John, one of the students, mentioned to his friends that his uncle had once told him about the grand mansion in Thetford Forest that was available for vacation rentals. As they stepped out of the Jeep and unpacked, they made their way to the entrance of the mansion, where they met a man who they thought was probably the security guard. He handed over the keys of the various rooms to John and just said, with a gloomy smile, "I'm Ronald, the caretaker. Give me a call if you need anything. I stay at the cottage not far from here, and I hope you have a nice time here." And afterwards he left. "Does anyone think that was creepy?" Teresa said, and they all laughed. After opening the main entrance door, they couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and wonder as the grand double doors creaked open, revealing a sprawling interior that was even more impressive than the exterior. "I was told the mansion had a rich history and was once home to some of the most affluent families in this region," John said. As they explored the mansion further, they found themselves lost in a world of luxury and elegance. The bedrooms were fit for royalty, complete with 4-poster beds, plush furnishings, and panoramic views of the surrounding forest. The dining room was large enough to host a banquet, and the library was filled with rare books and artifacts that had been collected over centuries. "This is going to be the best 3 weeks I've had during my time in this region," Shelley said. "We won't have to deal with 5 hours a week of Mr. Owen's history lessons," Kelvin said, and Teresa replied to him, "You mostly slept in 4 of those 5 hours if I can recall," and they all laughed. They continued exploring all the rooms of the mansion, from first floor to second floor to the third, and they soon noticed a door in the second floor, which was different from the other room doors. "What do you think is in there?" Shelley asked. "We are about to find out," John replied, trying to fit in the set of keys he had to see which one could open the door. But there wasn't any match, and John thought it was weird. "Maybe there isn't any key to the door," Kelvin said. "Or maybe the caretaker didn't give us the key. I told you guys, he was creepy." John said they shouldn't bother, that there are many other rooms in the mansion. When sunset came, the group decided to unwind in the cozy living room of a grand mansion, chit-chatting and popping a few cans of beers and soda. They had taken the opportunity to relax and enjoy the luxurious surroundings. But little did they know that their peaceful getaway was about to turn into a nightmare. As they lounged on the plush couches, Shelley suddenly felt that she heard a faint voice coming from upstairs. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked. "No," they replied simultaneously, but just as they said that, the voice increased, and they all remained motionless. At first, they dismissed it as their imagination or the wind, but the voice, which sounded like a faint whisper, kept happening periodically. "This is an old house," John said. "Many things would likely be old, hence the noise," he added, trying to calm the nerves of the group. They tried to ignore it, but their curiosity got the best of them as the sounds didn't stop, so they decided to investigate, and they made their way up the staircase to the second floor. As they approached the second floor, the voices seemed louder and sounded like it was coming from the locked door from before. They also heard a faint tapping sound coming from inside, which stopped them in their tracks. "Maybe it's a raccoon or a rat," Kelvin said. But almost immediately, they heard a human-like whisper, which sounded as if someone was trying to communicate with them, but in a hushed voice. Maybe we should just leave, Shelley said in a scared tone. I'll try contacting the caretaker. Meanwhile, you guys should look for something we could use to open the door. The group started scouring other rooms to find something they could use, and when John returned a few minutes later, he had a pale look on his face. The lines are down. I couldn't get through to the caretaker through the receiver, and the front door wouldn't open, he said. What do you mean by wouldn't open? Calvin asked. They had left their phones at the car because there wasn't any signal in the area. Calvin found an old metal rod and they tried to open the mysterious door, albeit slight protest from Shelley and Teresa, who insisted they shouldn't open. After a few strokes on the side of the door, it was slightly ajar and they hesitantly pushed it open, and what they saw made their blood run cold and they felt a chill run down their spines. The air seemed thicker and a sense of unease settled over them. The room was dark and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. However, they could see faint outlines of objects scattered around the room. The curtains billowed in the wind, even though the windows were tightly shut. The atmosphere was eerie and the students felt a sense of dread creeping on them. Inside the room, they saw a terrifying sight that made their blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the corner of the room, or so they thought, as it disappeared into thin air almost immediately. They tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside the room. They could still hear a sinister whisper echoing around the room as the entity was still lurking somewhere in the dark room, and they knew they had to find a way to escape before it was too late. I told you guys that was a very bad idea, Shelley cried out as they desperately searched for a way out. They tried every window they could find. What's this? Kevin asked, moving a wooden cupboard sideways to reveal a hidden passage, and without hesitation, and driven with fear of just escaping the dark room, they entered the passage, and it led them to the basement of the mansion. The basement didn't do much to calm their nerves, as it was also dark. They found a candle, and using a lighter, John lit it up to give them even if it's the slightest illumination, and they stumbled upon an old diary that probably belonged to one of the previous owners of the mansion. I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, we've had bad luck opening things today, Teresa said, but John replied saying they could find out what was going on in the house. After several flipping, the book revealed that the mansion was built on top of an ancient burial ground for people suspected of practicing witchcraft or sorcery, and the figure they had encountered was probably the vengeful spirit of a witch who had been executed there centuries ago. The words inscribed in the book was written by someone who had encountered the entity and did a very good background check, and written boldly, and it was, "This house is cursed. Someone, or something, seems to attack anyone who comes into the house, and no occupants stay more than a night. That is, if they survive the night. There has been some cases of people being possessed and losing their minds just by stepping into the forbidden room." John figured the dark room they ran away was the forbidden room, as they had just encountered this entity, and it wasn't hallucination, as they thought initially. "Maybe there's a way to stop it in the book," Shelley said, sounding more worried than before. "I think we should just leave," John replied, and just then they heard footsteps coming from somewhere close to the basement, and they stopped talking and remained motionless. They armed themselves with anything they could find in the basement and walked slowly towards the door. And just as they opened it slightly, someone approached John, tried swinging out a stick he held, but stopped as there wasn't anyone there, and almost immediately he saw a shadow darting into one of the open rooms. They tried running towards the back of the house, but soon various objects started moving on its own, and the big house seemed to be shaking. On reaching the back door, it was locked, and all their best efforts to open it were in vain. They stood and started thinking of how to escape the nightmare, while John flipped and flipped the old diary. "The clay pot," he exclaimed. He had remembered seeing a clay pot in the forbidden room, and he saw same in a page of the diary. "What does it say?" Shelley asked. "It said the pot contains a dark magic that serves as a power source for the entity. So we have to break it then?" Kevin asked, and John said it didn't specify. After deliberation, they mustered their courage and walked together, holding hands, from the back to the basement door to the forbidden room. But just as they entered, Shelley broke off from the group and ran out, talking gibberish as if she wasn't in her normal senses. Calvin rushed behind her to stop her while John tried locating the clay pot, and when he tried smashing it, Teresa, who was in the room with him, let out a loud cry. "Something scratched me on my legs." John, using the faint candlelight, saw what looked like a sharp finger scratch on Teresa's right leg. "That's it. Time to end this nightmare," he said, smashing the pot on the floor, which shattered, and almost immediately there was a calm throughout the entire building as the continuous whisper had stopped and Shelley passed out on the floor. They didn't wait any more seconds as they made their way out of the house and took off, never looking back.